My presentation is divided into three parts. First of all, I'm gonna give you an overview. My main goal in this talk is provide a counterexample against radical inactivism. For this reason, first I'm going to give a short introduction to Ecognition. In the second section, the concept of serendipity will be described as a meaningful cognitive process. And I use this concept to argue against radical inactivism. After that, in section 3, I'm going to describe how the serendipity can be explained in a structural angle. I have lots of things to cover, so let me start. Okay, Ecognition. The computational models had dominated in cognitive science for a period of time. However, the popularity of computational models has declined in cognitive science because of three main reasons, including first, rising interest in phenomenal consciousness, secondly, increasing embodied approaches to cognition, and thirdly, including experimental subjects in cognitive experiments because of development in imaging technology. In this presentation, I will focus on the embodied approach, in which our body has a main role in cognition. Often embodied cognition comes together with embedded and enacted cognition. The embedded thesis concentrates on the environment and its effect on the mental process. The thesis of enactivism is the claim that cognition consists in interactions between perception, action that involve brain, body, and the world. It would be noteworthy that these approaches are studied as a part of wider 4-year research program. Also, although they can be distinguished from each other, following some authors such as Shapiro, I consider all of them together under the name of Ecognition. Ecognition has challenged the idea that the mind is identical to the brain. Unlike computational models, computational approach, in Ecognition, what is placed behind the brain also plays a causal role in our cognitive process. In other words, when an agent is situated, its experience of the world depends upon not only its sensory mechanism, but also upon the nature of its body and the potential of its body to affect the world. In Ecognition, cognition is integrated with the body and environment. For example, gesturing makes easy not only our communication but also our language process. Social interaction is influential in infants' word learning, and in many cases, this seems essential to successful learning. Mirror neurons is another study in Ecognition. They fire not only when we perform an action like smiling, but when we observe others who are laughing. Many researchers in neuroscience and cognitive psychology argue that mirror neurons may be necessary for understanding the action of other people and for learning new skills by imitation. In some animals, we also see the result of ecognition. In echolocation, the difference in time between the echo's arrival to the bat's left and right ears uniquely determines the horizontal position of a prey insect. However, this information is not sufficient to determine the vertical position of the target. How does the bat's echolocation system solve this problem of underdetermination? It is answered that the shape of a bat's ear alters the sound in such a way that information about a target's vertical dimension is added to the incoming signal. For the last example, consider how two different organisms, a child and a puppy, are playing ball. She will be likely use her hands or feet. She will not usually use her mouth to get the ball. This is because the other options enable greater control, are easier to perform. However, a puppy has fewer options. It will most likely grab the ball with its mouth because its particular form of embodiment will not enable it to grasp the ball with its paws. Until now, I have tried to give an overview of what ecognition is. However, what is important for my purpose is a radical account of the enactivism. Also, Ecognition tries to adapt their explanation to become compatible with traditional models such as computation, representation, knowledge. The radical version tries to steer clear of those concepts. In the next section, I will give a short description of radical enactivism and its central claims. Radical enactivism is a more radical version of enactivism, which has been articulated by Fatemeh. They have two main claims in cognitive science. First, that there is no mental content, and second, that it is difficult to provide a theory of content that becomes compatible with naturalism. They argue that current naturalistic theories of mind cannot provide an account for the hard problem of content. In UttoMayan's view, also naturalistic theory of representation, telling to give an account of content, the operation can be explained without content. So why should we have recourse to content, they ask, when we can explain the phenomenon without it? They argue that what happens in cognitive processing is no more than causal interactions. So the rationale is that if taking content does not help us explain or predict anything, then mental content is unnecessary. For example, consider a child who is playing with a ball. Why should we think that there is a mental state presenting the ball in her brain? While we can say that her previous causal interactions with the ball and environment have brought about the suitable action. As UttoMayan claimed, we can explain the child's processing without using the concept of content. The second claim is that giving a naturalistic theory of mental content is difficult. To describe it, they drew a distinction between two concepts of information, including information as covariance and information as content. The information as content can be applied to truth, reference, and other semantic properties, while the former is a kind of information that is based on a covariance relation, and it cannot constitute semantic content. UttoMayan explained that these relations are just acceptable in scientific theories, not for constituting mental contentful properties. UttoMayan applied this distinction to theories of mental content such as Deretzky's informational theory or Millikan's telesemantic theory. These theories use causal relations to ground the mental content, and UttoMayan tried to argue that these theories give no answer to hard problem of content. In other words, they claim that what happens in these types of mental processing is not contentful. They are no more than causal mediators. However, I think that UttoMayan's claim will be challenged by the cognitive process which calls serendipity as events. The next section of my lecture will be about such a meaningful process. Serendipity. In this part of the presentation, I want to talk about serendipity and show how it can be used as a counterexample against radical enactivism. Serendipity is a category used to describe discoveries in science that take place at the intersection of chance and wisdom. For example, the discoveries of penicillin and DNA are cases of serendipity. The criteria for these types of creativity, as suggested by Boden, are being novel, surprising, and important. Welling claims that there are four kinds of creative process: application of existing knowledge, analogy, the combination of concepts, and abstraction. Hubbard, through examining 200 of discoveries and inventions, claims that combination of representation is a common property of discovery or invention. Besides, de Ronde has allocated the main part of his paper to identifying different kinds of serendipity. He shows there are four types of serendipity that Each one illustrated as identification of correct pairs of events, where correct means meaningful, not causal. Like Taggart, de Ronde has also pointed out that characteristic of serendipity is the meaningful pairing. It might be objected, why should we consider this pairing as meaningful? For instance, they can be considered as a result of a random or Wheeler combination. However, to support meaningful pairing, Taggart provides us with an useful example in this case. Galileo never intended to find the moons of Jupiter when he turned his new telescope on the heavens. But his interest, background knowledge, and cognitive process made it more probable that he would generate the representation Jupiter has moons than some utterly useless representations such as Rome has toes. In Galileo's case, the combined states are meaningfully related to each other. Jupiter and Moon have the close meaning. In penicillin story, for example, the concepts which are connected, mold and bacteria, have a close meaning too. Until now, I have tried to show that serendipity is a meaningful processing. So what can we say about radical enactivism? It seems that their claim, which there is no mental content, is faced with a big challenge. In the rest of this section, I want to set out my argument against radical enactivism. Also, serendipity accidentally happens in the context of discovery. It examines meaningfully. Fleming, for example, tried to discover what was taking place in the play while he was consciously observing the phenomenon. Or in the case of laughing gas, Dr. Bell's attention is attracted to the person who feels no pain. I think it is impossible to make an explicit guess, such as mold kills bacteria or laughing gas mitigates pain, without including any mental content. How can you make a guess by only looking at those phenomena? Is there something in our causal interaction that bring about these thoughts in us? I reply in a negative. From my point of view, there is nothing in Fleming or Bell's observation that tells them which concept should be combined. A mental capacity that goes beyond our causal interaction exists between our body and the environment. A mental capacity which can connect the relevant pieces of knowledge to each other. According to their own in such circumstances, there are individuals who are able to see bridge where others see holes. The agent should have a meaningful guess about the concepts which will be combined to form a suitable structure. So far, I have tried to argue that serendipity cannot be a mere consequence of causal interactions between a body and the environment. It seems that the mental content also plays a role in cognitive processing to select the relevant representation to combination. As I mentioned above, UttoMayan have two claims about the mental content. So far, I tried to show that their first claim, that there is no mental content, is false. Now I want to challenge their second claim, that is, giving a naturalistic theory of mental content is impossible. So I want to give a cognitive model of serendipity that is compatible with naturalism. For this purpose, I will use an account of mental content given by Lee. First of all, I will provide a short description of his account, then I apply it to serendipity. A mechanistic account of mental content. As we said in second section, serendipity is the consequence of a meaningful pairing, or in Taggart words, a combination of representations resulting in a serendipitous event. Now it might be asked what the nature of mental representation, how their claimed content can be grounded, and how can their content be ascribed semantic properties. For this reason, I here introduce his structural account of content and his answer to hard problem of content. Before explaining the Before explaining the arguments, I set out what is meant by a structural representation in this paper. It is a state which is based on an isomorphism between the state which is doing the representing and things that is represented. A map, for instance, exemplifies this type of representation. It represents the environment through a structural isomorphism between the map and the environment. The concept of a structural representation can be set up using O'Brien and Opie's definition in this way. We will say that there is a second-order resemblance between two systems SOV and SO. If for at least some objects in V and some relations in RV, there is a one-to-one mapping from V to O and a one-to-one mapping from RV to RO, such that when a relation in RV holds up objects in V, the corresponding relation in RO holds up the corresponding objects in O. Now let us describe this account of a structural representation. To answer the hard problem of content, Lee attempts to clarify what is the structural content. Lee claims that a structural information is the content of a structural representation. He believes that giving an account of how a state misrepresents is a way to understand representation of content. In addition, the representation of content is conventionally defined as semantically evaluable, and that we should be aware that it can be false or mirror non-actual estates. So he tries to describe how the content of a structural representation can be false. And to this effect, he uses the concept of accuracy condition. For this reason, he uses the concept of accuracy conditions. This is because, in Lee's opinion, accuracy better conveys the concept of misrepresentation in a structural relations, where accuracy can be treated as a truth, satisfaction, fulfillment, or some other semantic property. A given representation accurately represents where its content and target sufficiently correspond. Misrepresentation occurs when they do not. This argument is as follows. SOV is structurally similar to the target SOO. SOV can mirror the structure of SOO more or less accurately. The structural similarity entails accuracy conditions. Accuracy condition necessarily involves content. The structural similarity entails content. As a result, SOV content represents SO. To determine the content of a structural representation, Lee claims that it should play a role in systems function. It is only in relation to a representation of target fixed by the role of the mechanism in the wider system that representational content has an explanatory power. To illustrate this point, Lee uses an example of a store map. Suppose you want to buy a desk from a store. You use the map to successfully guide your way to the appropriate department, which is called the furniture department. Thus, it is the fact that a structure embodied in the map corresponds to the store that explains your success in navigate. You find your favorite desk and buy it. Unfortunately, when you come back home, you find a scratch on your desk. So you decide to change it. A night before you revisit, the interior design manager describes to exchange the location of the furniture department with a fast food restaurant. Now, when you come back to the store to change the desk by using your old map, you arrive at the restaurant instead. This time, you can explain the failure to get to the furniture department through the lack of correspondence between the store and the map. Using this example, it tries to show that success and failure of a system are totally dependent on the structural content. It shows how the system is sensitive to the structural content. These accounts enable us to give a contentful explanation of the process. So we can claim that states used by process are something more than causal mediators. Now let me back to serendipity and apply Lee's hybrid approach to it. Let me start with an example. Suppose you have recently come to a new area of the city. Your apartment is located on First Street. You have decided to go to a gym, which is placed on 2nd Street. You feel bothered that you have to go a long way to reach the gym while your apartment and gym are in front of each other. One day you forgot to buy a new pair of gloves for yourself. Your friend tells you that there is a sports shop 100 meters away from the gym on the same side. You go down First Street, all of a sudden you see it was located across the sports shop. You thought with yourself maybe it's a way to the first street. So far you are in the context of discovery. But to justify your guess, you go along the founded way to check whether it's connected to First Street or not. Finally, you see that yes, it is. I know these days with new technologies in mapping, my example is a little odd. However, it's helpful for my purpose. To make sense, you can imagine it's a new city or Google has not yet made a map. By this example, I wanted to show how serendipity can take place in a structural representation. Also, I explain what I intended by a meaningful combination of representations. When we are faced with an unexpected situation, we try to encounter it through manipulating the knowledge we possess so far. If we consider these mechanistic accounts of content, the health mental representation are structural ones. So the combination of them is a combination of mental modes. In other words, the meaningful pairing of mental representations brings about finding a new structure. After seeing this, we can give it a functional role to evaluate its accuracy. In the above example, your guess that it's a way to First Street is the result of your background knowledge and observation. In other words, it's a part of your mental structure of the world. It's vital to notice that our previous knowledge is held as a mental structure in our mind. Based on information, you make a guess and apply it to the world to assess its truth. In the case of penicillin discoveries, for example, it can be said Fleming explained the phenomenon of the lack of the bacteria around the node as the node inhibiting bacterial growth using his third background knowledge and unexpected observation. This was not, of course, the first time that this phenomenon takes place. However, Fleming was the first person to explain it in this way. As the Ronde points out, serendipity is not what no one had seen before, but in thinking what no one had yet thought. If we deny the existence of mental content like UttoMayan, it would be impossible to explain such a meaningful practical process such as serendipity. Consider the case of DNA discovery. While various groups who are attempting to find the shape of DNA molecule, when various groups who were attempting to find the shape of DNA molecules share the same knowledge, more or less, just Crick and Watson become successful to discover its model. If only the mutual interactions with the environment plays the key role in the discovery, why does not their competitors' effort being effective? I think an account of content processing is required to explain this difference. This structural account can be useful here. The structural representation carry content and guide our action and perception. As Taggart claims, the combination of the representation in our internal structure can pose to new concepts in our mind, and these new concepts bring about the agent explain events in a novel way. In this presentation, I tried to explain two arguments suggested by UttoMayan and argue against them. The first one was there is no mental content, and the second one was providing a naturalistic theory of mind is impossible. Then I tried to show that both of them are faced with the problem.